So let's take a look at the papers, and today we're joined by Thom Woodroofe. He's the 2009 Young Victorian of the Year. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be back.
Well, nice to have you back. I think we haven't had you here for a little while. And thank you for looking at the papers. And there's not much to look at. They're getting thinner and thinner, aren't they?
They are as we head towards Christmas, but we'll get to the Christmas stories a little bit later.
Good.
Let's jump right in with your lead story, the Christmas Island detainees, and The Age as leading that as their exclusive from Dan Flitton. I mean, this is just really an absurd story and just shows how the politics of it has just boxed the issue. I mean, on one hand, the government is still got children in detention, and on the other hand, the opposition is stuck without an effective policy and the ability to even say anything that's going to change the situation. And just to put that into context, the opposition, Scott Morrison, the new spokesman on the issue, has said the government should be seeking to identify alternative offshore processing options if they cannot accommodate people on Christmas Island.
Go back to Nauru.
Exactly, and it just shows that there's no other option. And another quote, a murky legal area giving rise to the prospect of asylum seekers on the mainland challenging detention in the courts, which surely should be, in any humane situation, entirely their prerogative if they so choose.
So how do you view then Kevin Rudd's much repeated mantra that his government is being tough on people smugglers but compassionate on asylum seekers?
Well, it's people smitten because there are still young people in detention, and as a young person myself, I mean, that is just a completely inhumane policy. And there's the line about children behind razor wire, and in many cases that's still the case. So in my opinion, it's just clearly political spin.
So when you say that the opposition sort of, the politics boxes the issue, what do you imagine might be an effective opposition policy then? I mean, what's the land, what's the area left for them to go to? Well,
I don't think it's got to do at all with the land they've got to go to. It's the land that they should go to. And if they go to that, sure, they'll lose some political credence for perhaps distancing themselves from the Howard era or from the past. But the capital that they will gain through having a humane approach, which just doesn't exist within Australian political discourse, will benefit them enormously and outweigh that.
They're not going to distance themselves from the Howard era, though, with Tony Abbott back in charge, and that's the point, isn't it? With Tony Abbott back in the main chair.
And we're seeing that already with the quotes that I just spoke about, including the murky area about legal protection for these people.
Well, let's head off overseas, and the wash-up from Copenhagen continues.
Going?
Yes. Well, look, this is going to be picked over for days.
Long hangover.
In a sense, I guess there has to be, and we're hearing some more, indeed, about India's role as well in all of this. Which papers are you looking at in particular, Tom?
Well, what's interesting, firstly, is just now Abbott's come out and said that Australia should have a 5% cap, and Rudd's saying we're not going to go beyond 25%. But it is thinning in the papers as the world becomes more consumed with eggnog and reindeers. But the Daily Telegraph's got an interesting sort of side story about the number of cars on the road there, with 1.49 cars now per household and 16.3 million car trips every day alone in New South Wales, which has now become the second largest emitter of CO2. Second only to forestry and agriculture, which is just phenomenal. And that just shows how the issue is, clearly important, but just not getting through at the international level. But what's more interesting, perhaps, is Ed Miliband, one of the two superstar brothers of the Ed and of the Milibands in the UK, wrote a piece on Sunday in The Guardian, which I think we've got as well.
Yep, that's right.
And that's really interesting to see that he sort of takes you a little bit behind the scenes with the Copenhagen negotiations, but also talks about how we must work to ensure the developed nations, in particular, such as Australia, Japan and the EU, deliver on the highest possible emissions cuts when they announce those in February. So there'll clearly be pressure from Gordon Brown to Kevin Rudd to do that, and hopefully that will have some impact. Yeah,
and we've now, I guess, got that rather narrow band that the political parties are prepared to talk about. The Greens still discussing, was it 45% they were talking, Bob Brown was mentioning to you yesterday?
25 to 40 with some flexibility that we're not sure about.
Yeah, that's right, which is clearly not going to happen. Yeah. But that's the range. David Miliband was very direct in blaming China for the way that talks got off the rails. But India is actually putting its hand up now and saying, no, we were in there too, and we were ferociously arguing against there actually being an emissions cut number named. So the Milibands can write all they like, but they're not going to get universal consensus on this, are they?
Well, Ed's article is interesting in the sense that whilst he does criticise China, he also makes the point that it's the first gathering in which China has agreed to, at least in principle, have an emissions cut, but not necessarily name what that is or for that to be binding.
You want to look at an issue in WA?
I do. The Labor MP, the member for Fremantle, Melissa Park, has come out now and said that the declaration of war should be an act of Parliament and not just in the hands of the executive, following on probably from the 2003 Iraq War.
Yeah.
Now, this happens all the time. Backbenchers come out with their own sort of personal viewpoints, and she's got a background as a human rights lawyer in Kosovo, so she's obviously intimately involved with the issue. But this one, I think, is particularly important, and coming from the US where I now live, it is a requirement that Congress does a formal declaration of war for troops that are deployed beyond 90 days. But there are loopholes in that, which we've seen because Vietnam didn't have an active war, Iraq, they didn't have an active war. But I think this is a really important issue and goes to sort of the heart of how we should view our constitution and the role of government in terms of security in Australia. So I thought I'd try and shine some light on that, and hopefully that gets somewhere.
Kick that debate along a little bit. It's interesting. I do not pretend to understand the constitutional implications of that, but as you mentioned in the United States, even though Congress has to sort of, rubber stamp it in a kind of way, the US President is the chief of the armed forces.
And here it's the Governor-General, but we don't see that extend beyond essentially attending parades and marches.
Now, Tom, we haven't got much time, but
Sure.
I do want to get you to the last point in the Northern Territory news.
Okay, no problem.
Can you can provide us with some insight
We can.
there?
Well, all the tabloids around the country are leading with their Christmas stories, as you would expect, but the Northern Territory News has bucked the trend with their story about what the hell is that smell? Mysterious.
Do you know what it is?
No, there's this mysterious smell, and there's Super 7 theories, they've called it. And I think number 7 is the most appropriate, exhaust fumes from a visiting UFO.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of UFOs in the Northern Territory, we know that. Tom, good to see you. Thanks so much.
You too. Thanks a lot for having me.